Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm just with George here tonight. We're just having a quick little late night chat. We'll probably just go for a little over an hour. We're not going to do the full 2 hours tonight. We're just going to be primarily focusing in on the media and just how the Jesuits overwhelmingly control it and manipulate it and steer it to their ends. Um, George was going in on we were before we were going talking live. George, was you going to mention something on Hillary Clinton? But I guess a good way to quickly kick off the show tonight on the Jesuit control of media, I thought was have you do you know the Syrian Jesuit George Paulo Dell'Aglio, SJ? Have you heard
I'm not familiar with him.
He's this okay. He's an interesting character because this kind of ties into the Jesuit media. But like, this was admitted that Paulo Daglio in 2012, this Jesuit priest, was openly calling for the revolution, like the removal of Bashir al-Assad in Syria. You know, something that Hillary Clinton, as her time as Secretary of State, was campaigning for the removal of Assad, her whole tenure. But this Jesuit priest, Paulo Daglio, SJ, uh, was actually known to have like connected with ISIS members. Like this was reported in the Syrian press. Like the Syrian government actually accused him of being an agent of ISIS. This Jesuit Paulo Daglio. But supposedly, after 3 weeks after like meeting with these ISIS extremists, Paulo Daglio was said to have disappeared in Syria. He was supposedly this Jesuit priest was supposedly kidnapped by ISIS soldiers, which makes no sense because like he was down there, greeting the ISIS soldiers and they're like and promoting their cause and removing Assad. And ISIS is ultimately a CIA creation, and that's why they get Russian and American top-notch weapons, for
Well,
instance. But this Paulo Daglio, interestingly, there was an interview in this. I think it was the Syria Deeply. There's an interview he did in 2013 where the Syrian journalist actually asked him. The Syrian journalist said clearly, Father Daglio, your activities here in Syria go beyond just restoring normal Christian and Muslim relations. And the journalist, the paper asked if his activities in Syria are typical of a Jesuit, and he gave like a Jesuitical response to it. But it turns out that he actually is still alive. Like he wasn't dead, like the Jesuit-controlled media reported. And I think it was a cover because I think this Jesuit Father Daglio is actually like the father of ISIS. I think he's one of like ISIS's key handlers in the region, and it was a good way to like a smokescreen to say that this Jesuit has been captured by ISIS, but like he's still alive. Like
well,
there's reports that he's still alive. So like the initial report that he was captured like has been discredited, and it's just really intriguing because he this Jesuit priest, and again his name is Father Paolo Daglio. He's an Italian, but he was documented to actually be meeting with Islamic ISIS extremist soldiers.
that reminds me of James Foley, who was it back in 2013, 2014. He was a U.S. journalist who was allegedly kidnapped and beheaded by ISIS. Well, Foley got his undergrad degree in journalism from Marquette, and
Oh, fascinating.
there's a famous video of him saying, "I'm James Foley, I'm an American journalist, and this is please learn from my lesson." And there's these thugs in black hoods who are speaking with, well, one has a British accent, and this is for you, Obama. Stop messing the Middle East because this will happen to more of you. And so he allegedly, this alleged ISIS operative chopped Foley's head off. Whether that actually happened,
What was this Foley's first name? That's amazing. I mean, that's not a coincidence. What, James Foley?
yes,
Oh yeah,
you got to.
okay. So that's two instances where I think we're seeing Jesuit theater at play with ISIS, and it makes sense because ISIS is a complete Jesuit CIA creation. Like like foreign policy in Iraq has been Jesuitized, since 9/11. Like it was the long time Jesuit trained at Georgetown CIA operative David Shedd, who was like leading the intelligence committee teams on the weapons of mass destruction, back in 2004. And we know like the whole narrative to get America into Iraq was a lie. And what the U.S. intervention actually did in Iraq was like create ISIS. Like they disbanded the Iraqi army, put like hundreds of thousands of Iraqis onto the streets with guns and like with ammunition. Now like, but all these soldiers are unemployed, um, and like ISIS is their baby. You know what I mean? Like they're steering it like the whole way through, and like it's not. And like I mentioned this brief like just earlier. It's for the viewers. It's not a coincidence that ISIS is ending up with American-made weapons. Like they're ending up with Russian-made weapons. Like, and I just think these incidents with James Foley, like that's to me, that's screams of a Jesuit theater incident. Like this Father Paulo D'Aglio SJ incident, and it's in line with like the global war on terrorism is the Jesuit agenda. Like in 2002, you had a joint NATO Russia summit meeting that took place in Rome, of all places. This was 1 year after 9/11, 3 years after the false flag 1999 apartment bombings in Russia, which was basically Putin's 9/11 or Russia's 9/11. But after those two big Jesuit false flag events, you have Russia and NATO meeting in Rome to sign a joint treaty to join to get together and combat the war on terrorism. And like that's just in your face, like like showing you that like it's controlled by on both sides. Like what the objective of 9/11 was, create like a national security state, and that's just what the war on terror has. It's the continuation of that. But I don't mean to keep ranting here, but these James Foley and Paulo D'Aglio, I think, are cases of Jesuit theater in relation to ISIS.
I had a shopping list of things I want to talk about, but I usually email it to myself, so I'm just going off the top of my head. Well, you're talking about media control. I can address that specifically in a moment, but one of the things I had wanted to talk to you about was tampering with evidence or destroying crime scenes. How many examples have there been over the last few decades? Sandy Hook, Waco, the apartment complex where Jeffrey Dahmer lived in Milwaukee. There's all sorts of examples. 9/11. There's a video. There's two videos. There's a video that came out in 1993 called "Waco: The Big Lie" by Linda P. Thompson, and one the following year called "Waco Part 2: The Lie Continues." In the first video, Thompson mentions that almost immediately, like within a day or so, the FBI finishing its raid on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, they began bulldozing the site. The very day of, and they did the same thing just prior to that.
Well, I wonder if in terms of Waco, like the director of the FBI during the siege was Louis Freeh, a known member of Opus Dei, which is a branch of the Jesuits, and the head of the ATF during Waco, Ronald Noble, was a knight of Saint Gregory the Great. So I wonder if that had something to do though with them, bulldozing the evidence right away, because it's a reoccurring theme with the Vatican. The Vatican always immediately erases all traces of evidence in all cases. It's always the Jesuit coadjutors in every case that are the ones erasing the evidence. Like in the Jonestown incident, it was Jesuit trained at Loyola Montreal Zbigniew Brzezinski who gave the orders for the bodies to rot in the Guyana field so that no U.S. medical team could make any identifications on the body. But it is a reoccurring theme, like in all of these events. Like, sorry, keep going, George.
Okay, well, the Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested. Was it 1991, 92 in Milwaukee? Now something that Johnny had mentioned, and we discussed before you joined the show, was that Dahmer's dad, Leonard Dahmer, got his degree from Marquette. Both the prosecutor and Dahmer's lawyers had also gone to Marquette. So the Jesuits were in control of the whole Dahmer situation from stem to stern. Something we discussed on the show last year was Dahmer um, who lived from 1963 to 1994. He was killed in prison by a fellow prisoner. He had spent some time in the early 1980s in the U.S. Army, and he was stationed in what was then West Germany. And he got a general discharge, but he may have been involved with at least one murder over there. And he got a general discharge, not a dishonorable discharge. So almost immediately after Dahmer's arrest, the people decided, I guess, I'm not sure who, decided to bulldoze the building. Now, I have an email of this. The chief of police for Milwaukee at the time was, I'm sorry, I have the name here somewhere. Philip. Yes. Here
Oh,
it is.
you cut out there. I just heard Philip. Did you say what was the last name?
Philip Areola, who is a Roman Catholic. He was the chief of police for Milwaukee from 1989 to 1995. Areola's background, his education was secular, but he was like the executive director of the local Catholic Boys and Girls League at the time. Um,
Well, there
so
you go. That's the connection right there. He's controlled like by the church.
okay. Also, now, I know you've done more than one video on Sandy Hook, so I won't really address that in any detail. But almost immediately after the whole alleged shooting, they decided to bulldoze the site there. And the very day, Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York City on 9/11, ordered the removal of the beams from the World Trade Center. On the sun had not even gone down yet
Dude,
before
where did
he.
those go? Didn't they send those to a museum somewhere or a warehouse?
Um,
I thought they sent
well,
them to like a warehouse or something like that.
Well, I believe he sold them overseas for scrap. So you have these major episodes: Waco, Sandy Hook, uh, the Jeffrey
We gotta
Dahmer.
think
You
about
just talked
going
about.
back. Think this one's huge. Think about the JFK. Like he had like this was like I think this probably like the Jesuit meddling is incredible here. Like yeah, they have the car. Like you'd think you would want to like analyze like the vehicle Kennedy was shot in. But, like they sent the
Mhm,
car up to Ford Motor Company, like the Ford Chrysler complex up in Detroit, which was headed up
mhm,
by a Knight of Malta, Lee Iacocca, and the car was just like wiped clean and stripped. Like they got like no forensic evidence off of the car. Like another Kennedy, like I listened to Mae Brussel was talking about this on a show. The gun that was used to kill, or the LAPD confiscated like the guns in the Robert Kennedy assassination, and like both guns, like literally like both guns, like they confiscated and said like no, the case is like we're not opening it up again. So like, May was talking about how like they couldn't do ballistics testing because the LAPD had already thrown away the guns. For instance. But like that shows right there that like something's up. Like no honest investigation would have that happen. Like with those two Kennedy cases. But it's literally every deep state event this occurs.
Well, I mean, something I was just discussing with Johnny on the phone yesterday. According to, this is something I mentioned on the show last year. According to Eric John Phelps, yes, I know we have qualms about him. He's probably Jesuit. Okay, having said that, um, on Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona, according to Phelps, was destroyed by a bomb from within. It destroyed. The Japanese did not sink any U.S. naval vessels with torpedoes. This is according to Phelps. Um, and it was done for several purposes. The Arizona had to be sacrificed, according to Phelps, for psychological reasons. It would be like, remember the Maine, remember the Alamo. Something like over 1,000 men were killed on the USS Arizona. There was something like close to 3,000 men who died that day, or at least in terms of Americans. The Japanese lost relatively few. I mean, their losses were probably under 100. Anyhow, so if you had the Arizona sunk, destroyed, which was the largest vessel at Pearl Harbor, that would be, that was a huge blow to America. Now, so they raised all the other vessels, within a few days, but the rationale for not raising the Arizona is it was too badly damaged. Well, they could have fixed the hull, and they could have, serviced it. But if they raised it, they would have, people would have realized it was destroyed from within. So they almost always have a cover story for everything. I mean,
We know to
just
tie
getting
it in the
back to
media with Pearl Harbor. Who is the main pundit, like parroting the official line of like the Japanese, invasion on the naval base, or the Japanese invasion on the harbor? Like the main media pundit pushing this line was John Daly, trained by the Jesuits at Boston College.
yes, the future host, the future original show host of the, What's My Line?
So again, though, you see the Jesuits pop up again with Pearl Harbor in terms of like reporting it. And immediately right after Pearl Harbor, like obviously Roosevelt knew what was coming down the pipe. Like right after interestingly, the Vatican right after Pearl Harbor got into official legal diplomatic relations with Japan, almost like immediately after Pearl Harbor. But Roosevelt's personal representative, to the Japanese government, Frank Commodore Walker, was trained by the Jesuits at Gonzaga College.
Yes, and he got his law degree
from Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you can see like they're controlling they're controlling it on all angles, and like they're just like like 9/11, like any other event, like they're parroting the main official line to the masses. And like there was nothing in the American media about, like there was no outcry about the Vatican getting into diplomatic relations with Japan right after this happening. Which I think was incredible.
Or just prior to that, the Vatican establishing diplomatic relations with Nazi Germany in 1933, or Italy in 1920, the fascist Italy in 1929.
Absolutely.
Or the other fascist.
I was going to say with Spain, like there was no coverage on how like the Nazis and like Mussolini and the Vatican like launched a crusade in Spain and like overthrew like a legally democratically elected government. Well, part of the Jesuit press control at that time was like Roosevelt gave absolutely zero American aid to the Spanish Republic, and like they were the American press was like calling the Spanish Republic like a Soviet puppet state, through the Jesuit press.
Well, and of course, the media control back then. Nowadays, we have Rupert Murdoch, who runs Fox News here in the United States. You had Ted Turner, he created CNN. He used to run it. Both of whom were Knights of Malta.
I didn't know Turner was. Well, I know Murdoch is a Knight of St. Gregory the Great, and I've seen people. I haven't seen the video clips. I haven't seen the whole footage, but I've apparently when Rupert Murdoch spoke at Georgetown, and I think this was 2004. Rupert Murdoch said the Jesuits and News Corps like are the same, or like are very similar. I've seen that though. Rupert Murdoch said that the Jesuits and News Corp are very similar. And an interesting connection to News Corp, if you don't know this, George, was the author of the USA Patriot Act. As Johnny would say, the adversely named Patriot Act. It is adversely named because it legalized the national security state. But the author, the architect of the act, Veit Din, was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown. We know that, but if people aren't aware, he was also he was on the board of directors at News Corp. May still even be, but that's Rupert Murdoch is the chairman CEO of News Corp. Like News Corp owns like 800 companies in 50 different countries. But Veit Din was on the board of News Corp during the time of 9/11. And we know we've covered this before, but it shows just more Jesuit involvement. Like John Daly was the first reporter on the scene at Pearl Harbor, trained by the Jesuits. Mika Brzezinski, first reporter on the scene at during 9/11, trained by the Jesuits. So the proof becomes overwhelming. And we could go through this more. Like we can go through, like, if you go through lists of who's really controlling the media, it becomes overwhelming that it's the Jesuits in the Vatican. And if people aren't aware, like Amazon got into a $600 million contract with the Catholic Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. The Catholics, the Catholic Herald openly admits that the Catholics like brag through their Catholic Herald in a 2016 article that they control the CIA. But the CIA got into a $600 million deal with Amazon, and the Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos outright owns the Washington Post.
Okay.
And you think, well, the Washington Post is one of the biggest establishment media outlets, and like their owner has a direct contract with this Catholic Intelligence Agency. So you can see like the control is profound, and this was this year. Amazon gave out $15 million in cash to Catholic charities, and that's after getting into business with the Catholic Intelligence Agency. And Amazon, if people aren't aware, they're building like a cloud system for the CIA. For instance, but there's like no reporting. Like the Nation magazine actually took down the article they wrote on that deal. There's only like 2 or 3 mainstream publications that wrote about it. One of them was The Atlantic, and I've done what's the guy's name here? The founder of The Atlantic magazine, or this current CEO of The Atlantic, David G. Bradley, is trained by the Jesuits at Georgetown. And The Atlantic is like one of the only media outlets that covered Amazon's deal with the CIA, for instance. And if you haven't seen these videos, George, it's kind of funny. Like there's videos online of the Amazon Alexas. The Alexa is kind of like their wireless speaker. You can, it's like a radio. You can do a few things on it. But like the Amazon Alexa, it's kind of like the Google Home speaker, if you've seen it. But like people on YouTube have asked the question to their Amazon Alexa, like hey Alexa, do you work for the CIA? And the Alexa will like shut down when asked that question, for instance. But just quickly here, like this guy's another big media pundit. David G. Bradley is the owner of Atlantic Media, and he went to Jesuit Georgetown. And actually, another one, the current CEO of Bloomberg Media. Bloomberg. A lot of people get their news from Bloomberg. Justin B. Smith is an American businessman, chief executive officer at Bloomberg. Justin Smith also worked for Atlantic Media and The Economist and Week magazine. But Justin Smith went to Jesuit Georgetown University, where he's on the board of directors. And this guy's on the fellow at the Aspen Institute. He's has a career in the Department of State. Joined the International Herald Tribune. These are the names that really control the media. Like the current CEO of the New York Times, Mark Thompson. The New York Times supposedly is a Jewish-controlled media outlet. You hear all the Catholic propaganda say the New York Times is a Jesuit or a Jewish-controlled media outlet. But Mark Thompson, the current CEO of the New York Times, where did he go to school? Jesuit Stonyhurst College. And it actually says there's on the Mark Thompson's Wikipedia page. There's just a quick sidebar here on Jimmy Savile. It says Thompson faced questions about his role in the events around Knight of Malta pedophile Jimmy Savile's actions and the BBC's coverage of them, because Mark Thompson was the head of the BBC before coming to New York Times. And Mark Thompson, Jesuit trained, has denied knowing of a BBC Newsnight program on accusations against Savile before the program was dropped soon after Savile's death. So like this Jesuit trained Mark Thompson, current CEO of the New York Times, former Director General of the BBC, is denying that like the BBC knew about Jimmy Savile's activities before, while they were taking place, which I think is probably Jesuitical gatekeeping. But if you want to jump in, George, I think I think I'm going to bring up more tonight, but I think that's a significant batch of coadjutors that I just listed there.
Well, I was just mentioning print media. Now, of course, we talked about William Randolph Hearst and Henry Lewis in the past. You've done videos of both of them. Now, the launching pad for Hearst was the San Francisco Examiner. He was actually born in San Francisco, and in his dates were, I believe, 1863 to 1951. And he owned dozens of newspapers, radio stations, and he actually even got into film. Well, the other daily paper in San Francisco, going back to the 19th century, was the Chronicle. It's still in existence. Now, it's on life support, as are most daily newspapers. However, the Chronicle was founded by Michael DeYoung, and he's part of the DeYoung family. They were Dutch Jewish converts to Catholicism, and they were back in the 19th century and early 20th century. The DeYoungs were major power players in San Francisco. They were instrumental. In addition, they're working for the Catholic Church. So you basically, the local Archbishop of San Francisco would consult with the DeYoung family, said, "Hey, so and so is thinking about running for mayor. Do you think we should back him?" And said, "Yeah." And the Michael or Charles, his brother, would say yay or nay, or such and such person is thinking about running for governor. Do you think we should back him? So they were tremendous power brokers. Now, right across the bay from San Francisco is Oakland, and the daily paper over there, well, it's now part of a consortium of other papers, but for a long time was the Oakland Tribune. And he didn't establish it, but William Dargy was the owner of the Tribune for the same time as Michael DeYoung. He's actually is buried in St. Catherine Cemetery in Oakland. So the heads of the two biggest San Francisco, or two of the biggest Bay Area newspapers, were both Roman Catholic. Now, there was another. Now, I mentioned the Sacramento Bee, which is also in Northern California. I used to live in Sacramento. It was founded by James McClatchy, and I know I've mentioned this before. And after his death, his sons Charles and Val took it over. Both Charlie and Valentin got their undergrad degrees from University of Santa Clara. So, and they ran. The McClatchy family ran a string of other newspapers. They weren't nearly as prominent as, say, Hearst, but the papers were mostly in California. So you have, going back over 150 years, you have these people controlling print media all over the country.
Oh, absolutely. And Hearst was made a papal count in 1951, and great information on all these California papers you brought up, George. The Sacramento Bee, in particular, the UCD, Santa Clara University. I recommend. I may do this later on the broadcast today, because we're going through some of the media personalities. I have a list of Fordham and Georgetown University up, and I'm just going to go through some of the media personnel, because there's tons of past, present, and future media, because these schools, like the Jesuit educational apparatus, is what grooms and educates like the future generations of newsmen. But I found here just that there was a Knight of Malta who was this guy was in the shadows at the Hearst Empire when it was kicking off in the 30s. And I found this in a CIA declassified file. But this guy's name here was Frank Massey. And it's just quoting from the declassified file. You just hear an example like this Frank Massey. You'll see that like the Vatican and the Jesuits through organizations like the Knights of Malta, can enact real like influence within these like media empires. But it says here Massey joined the Hearst Corp in 1934 as the chief accountant of the Old Pictorial Review Company. In 1939, he became a member of the Hearst Corp General Financial and Auditing Department. That's a pretty important department. In 1953, he became the assistant treasurer of the corporation. And 8 years later, he was named treasurer. So he had the treasurer of the Hearst Corp was the Knight of Malta. But continuing, he was appointed. Frank Massey was appointed executive president in 1968. A native New Yorker, he attended New York University and the City College of New York. Massey launched his career in the publishing field in 1927 as an accountant with the McGraw-Hill Publishing Company. And interesting, McGraw-Hill Publishing Company is, one of the biggest mainstream establishment publishers, still to this day. But their accountant in 1927, Frank Massey, was a Knight of Malta. He had a long career there. But in 1932, Massey became associated with the Pictorial Review, a women's magazine. When in 1934, the Hearst Corp purchased the review, Massey was retained as the chief accountant. And he says here, Massey is a member of the board of directors of Southwest Forest Industries, Inc., and he serves on the board of the Manufacturers Hanover Trust. And the CIA says he is a Knight of Malta. But I say that's a good example of how Massey and Hearst, or Frank Massey at the Hearst Corp, the Vatican can exert its control. And I did a long post up on Hearst like 6 months ago on my blog. But I have a quote. I have this book in print, and I put this on my archive at Eric Bowman 77. But in the book here, Hearst Over Hollywood, Power, Passion, and Propaganda, the movies, there's a quick quote. It said, Hearst, too, had come out strong for the Catholic hierarchy's position on issues of war and peace, and had been a vocal supporter of the Legion of Decency and its calls for movie censorship, which I think interesting quotation. If people aren't aware, the man who succeeded William Randolph Hearst as the head of the empire, Richard E. Berlin, was a Knight of Malta. You can find that in his Richard E. Berlin's obituary in the New York Times.
Well, you're talking about the Hayes Code. Well, you didn't mention that by name, but you talked about that before, and it was the brainchild of a couple of priests, Lord and
actually, George, I'm holding. I have that. Where is that book? I have that book in my hands right now. Yeah, it was Daniel Aloysius Lord. I think he was a fourth. I think he was a fourth vow Jesuit. But I'm going to scan this book in sometime. I didn't mean to cut you off there, George, but I just want to give the title for the viewers. His autobiography is called "Played by the Ear: The Autobiography of Daniel A. Lord, S.J." But this guy was the individual who authored the production code, and he actually brags about it in this book. Keep going, George.
Well, you mentioned some films that were popular in the 1930s. Well, you did, but Johnny did. Like you had Boys Town, Gabriel over Washington. Something we discussed before was the Ronald Reagan film, which is, I believe, was his first one. Newt Rodney, All American, came out in 1940. Well, just after World War II, you had these fluff pieces with Ben Crosby, The Bells of St. Mary's and Going My Way, where Crosby played a priest. And he, of course, those who don't know, was Roman Catholic. He went to Gonzaga Prep in Spokane, Washington. So you had all these films coming out in the 1930s and 40s that were just basically propaganda pieces for the Catholic Church or their institutions like Notre Dame.
And absolutely. A great book people got to read. It's on my archive, Eric Bowman, archive.org, Eric Bowman 77 page, but it's Hollywood Censor. It's a biography on Joseph Ignatius Breen. He was the chairman of the Production Code Administration. That was the administration that was put in place to enforce the quote Hayes Code that was written by a Jesuit, Daniel A. Lord. But like this Joseph Breen, George, who was enforcing the PCA for like 20 years, he had two brothers who were Jesuit priests. He was Jesuit educated at St. Joseph's. Like he was employed at the National Catholic Welfare Conference. Joe Breen like was working with Fox covering the National Eucharistic Congress in Chicago that took place at Soldier Field in 1927. Like Joe Breen was a Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Gregory the Great. Like it goes on and on and on. Like he was as plugged in as you could get. He wrote on a pseudonym in the Jesuits America magazine, for instance. And this is the guy that was in charge, of enforcing Hollywood production standards for like 15 years. So like that's probably one of the main reasons why there's so many fluff pieces. There's many other it goes way deeper than just Joseph Ignatius Breen, but he was a huge. It was big for the Jesuits to have a guy like one of their key agents like him as head of the Production Code Administration, the PCA. And I'll repeat that just if people didn't catch that. The book's titled Hollywood Censor by Thomas Doherty. I think it was published by Columbia University.
Oh, okay. Well, you're talking about fluff pieces. People probably don't know this, but the current baseball team, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, they've been known as different things since the early 1960s. They played originally in Wrigley Field, Los Angeles, which prior to that was a minor league field. Now, generally speaking, when people say Wrigley Field, they think about the stadium where the National League Chicago Cubs play. So it's a bit confusing. But then the Angels moved briefly and they shared the same facilities with the Dodgers at Chavez Ravine. Then they sort of for a few years. Then they got their own facility in Anaheim, which was originally, well, it's been called different things. It was called the Big A in Anaheim. I think they call it Edison Field now. Anyhow, getting to my point, the park was designed, Wrigley Field, Los Angeles, was designed by Zachary Taylor Davis, who also was responsible for the design of the Wrigley Field in Chicago and Comiskey Field. Uh, Zachary Tyler Davis lived from 1869 to 1946. He went to Mount Carmel High School and to Archbishop Quigley Preparatory School. So even
great information. And if people aren't aware, just quickly, Archbishop Quigley was the individual who was bragging how the Catholic Church will rule the United States in 50 years. He said that in 1903. Just a interesting side fact. What was the name of this? What was the name of this architect again, George? Who designed the Wrigley Field?
His name was Davis, Zachary Taylor Davis.
No, that's interesting. And he designed Comiskey Field. What was the first name of Comiskey again? He was a super plugged-in Catholic.
Carl
Comiskey?
Yes, he was known as Charlie Cheapskate because he was fairly frugal. He went to Ignatius Prep.
Oh, great information. And it's come full circle. The current owner of the Chicago Cubs, Ted Ricketts, is a Knight of Columbus and is the current governor of Nebraska. Very intriguing position there. And actually, I'll clarify this on the show with Johnny we did a few days ago. I said that Trump was a professor, or one of his professors at Fordham with Avery Dulles, but I meant to speak on Vincent Viola being directly connected to Avery Dulles. That Vincent Viola was Trump's appointed Secretary of Army in 2016. I don't think it went through, but he was one of Trump's proposed appointments for the Secretary of Army. And Viola is an interesting character because he went to Jesuit Fordham, is the current owner of the Florida Panthers, was the commander of the 101st Air Force Division that you were talking a bit about on the last show. But Viola sponsored an Avery Dulles scholarship endowment program at Fordham. So Viola was connected, directly to the Trump administration. So I guess that's somewhat of a connection from Trump to Avery Dulles. But I guess I want to get into this, George, just before we wrap up the show, just to tie it into like the media theme. I have a list of Georgetown University alumni. I'm on the journalism media section. I'm just going to go through some of the personalities. This guy is currently on TV all the time. Guy Adami. He hosts the show Fast Money 5 on CNBC's Fast Money show. Or that's the show on CNBC. He's one of the original Fast Money 5. But Guy Adami went to Georgetown. Jack Anderson is an investigative journalist, newspaper columnist, wrote for the United Feature Syndicate. Let me see here. He was the Washington bureau chief for Parade magazine. Won a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. He supposedly revealed the history of the CIA's plot to assassinate Fidel Castro, and he went to Georgetown. Yeah, it's probably covering up how Castro was a Jesuit plant and a puppet. But Jack Anderson was his name here. Here's this guy's a prominent print guy here. Bruce Bartlett, American historian and author. He served as a domestic policy advisor to Ronald Reagan and as a Treasury official to George H.W. Bush. He went to Georgetown University. Let me see his journalism career here. He's written for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Fortune Magazine, and Commentary Magazine. That's Jesuit-trained Bruce Bartlett, who was also in the Bush administrations and the Reagan administrations. Occurs Michelle Bernard. She's a current American journalist, political analyst, president and CEO of the Bernard Center for Women. But Michelle Bernard went to Georgetown, and Bernard is frequently a political and legal analyst for MSNBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, NPR, and the McLaughlin. And she is a columnist for Roll Call, a contributor for the Washington Post and the Huffington Post. Michelle Bernard, trained at Georgetown. Actually, I don't know if you saw this, George, but if people aren't aware, one of the main key figures in the 2008 financial crash in the United States was Angelo Mazzillo of Countrywide Financial, and he went to Jesuit Fordham University, which no one in the media emphasizes that fact. But Angelo Mazzillo went to Fordham, and his daughter wrote an apologist piece in the Huffington Post saying, "Oh, my dad got a bad rap. He's a good guy, blah blah blah." But he was scamming people for 20 years with his racket mortgage schemes at Countrywide Financial. So his name is Angelo Mazzillo. This is a big list here, George. It's overwhelming how the Jesuits control media. Here's the Supreme Court reporter for the Washington Post, Joan Biskupic. From 1992 to 2000, she was the Supreme Court writer for the Washington Post, and she was a legal affairs writer for Congressional Quarterly. She's also been a panelist on the Washington Week. She's appeared on the Today Show, Good Morning America, Face the Nation, Nightline, the Diane Rehm Show, and she's a legal affairs correspondent for USA Today. She's a legal affairs advisor, a writer for Reuters. Her name is Joan Biskupic, Biskupic. Went to Georgetown. You see here, sports editor at the Washington Post for 41 years, Shirley Povich. Here he born to Jewish immigrants, but went to Georgetown University. And he was also a war correspondent at the Washington Post. But the Washington Post, longtime sports correspondent, interestingly, there for over 40 years. Shirley Povich went to Georgetown. This is
Tamori Povich.
Let me see here. What was the Mamori Povich?
Yes, he is or was a talk show host.
Let me see here. It doesn't say. He is the father of the attorney David Povich. Yeah, American television personality Maury Povich, and editor Lynn Povich. Did you say Maury Povich? Is that the name?
Yeah.
Maurice Povich. Yeah, that's him. Yeah. So they're related. Yeah, but this guy here,
okay.
It says while Jesuit trained Shirley Povich was at the Washington Post, he was extensively covering the Knight of Columbus, Jesuit trained Babe Ruth. That's funny. But yeah, just I'll go a bit down the list here. Like the New York Times wine columnist. This guy died in 2012, but Frank J. Pril, Pril. He was a wine columnist. Like what are you kidding me? Like the New York Times, like what kind of journalism are you doing with all the stuff you could be covering out there in the world? You're covering wine. Like that to me, that's a Jesuit tree by itself. But Frank J. Pril was a wine columnist for 25 years at the New York Times, and he went to Georgetown. And he also he worked for the newspapers, the Newark Evening News and the New York World Telegram. And this guy's big here. I know this name's popped up on previous shows. You know, Sumner Redstone George, media executive.
Yes.
Yeah, former CEO of Viacom and CBS, trained at Jesuit Georgetown. Actually, if you want to jump in here, George, I'll keep going down the list, or if you want to go speak on other media personalities, you know, who are controlled by the Vatican. There's the current one of the current board of. Let me see here. What was this here? Give me a second. There's a connection to Viacom. Yeah, the current chairman of the board of directors at Viacom. His name's Thomas J. May. So there's two connections. You have Summer Redstone, or Summer Rothstein, was a CEO chairman at Viacom. He was trained by the Jesuits at Georgetown. And the current chairman, CEO of Viacom, Thomas J. May. He's the chairman of Roman Catholic Stonehill College, and he went to Roman Catholic. He went to Stonehill Roman Catholic College, and Thomas May is on the executive council on the Catholic Schools Foundation in Boston. And this Thomas J. May guy, while being the chair of Viacom, also is on the board of directors at Bank of America. He's a chairman of EverSource Energy, or was a chairman. He's on the board of the Connecticut Light and Power Company, NStar Electric Company, Yankee Gas Services, and he's a trustee at the Diana Farber Cancer Institute. So this is like a real, this is a real, like Catholic financial aristocrat right here. Yeah, Thomas J. May, and he's on the executive council for the Catholic Schools Foundation in Boston, as well of being on the board of Catholic Stonehill College. So, and Viacom is one of the 6 companies that has there's 6 companies in the U.S. thanks to Jesuit-trained Bill Clinton signing the Telecommunications Act. There's 6 companies in the United States that control 98% of all of the media. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble on there, George, but that list is just. I only went through 25% of the list, and you just from what I went.
Well,
from what I went through, you see the Jesuit power displayed.
Okay, well, Eric, if you don't ramble on, I'll ramble on. I guess I can let you catch your breath for a second. Now, we were talking for the most part about print media, but I mentioned this before, but traditionally in the U.S., you've had 3 major television networks: ABC, American Broadcast Corporation; CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System; and NBC, National Broadcast Corporation. And you also have they have radio versions of it, and you have independent stations. Now, that was originally in the 1960s. You had the creation of public broadcasting systems, PBS. So that's the radio version. Well, or rather, the TV version. The radio version is National Public Radio, NPR. I've talked about other people on NPR. There's a fellow who started a program called All Things Morning Edition, and he's done other things. Robert Allen Edwards, Bob Edwards. He was born in 1947, and he hosts a program. Currently the Bob Edwards Show, but he's done other things such as Morning Edition. He went to St. Xavier High School in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, granted, that's not quite the same thing as Georgetown, but that was just another.
I think it shows that he's controlled. He's going to toe the line.
And of course, he probably has an intelligence background. He spent some time in the U.S. Army. And was stationed in
that's a great point. Just probably George, probably 6, 7 names that I just listed. I was just mentioning. I was highlighting the Georgetown connection, but many of those names I just listed have military backgrounds or intelligence backgrounds also.
And of course, that helps you out if you're going to be in media, news media, or an actor, or politics, or a combination thereof.
Absolutely,
So
it helps you get like connections. Like as a lot of these news, anchors like who are trained by the Jesuits and who are Catholic educated, they'll get. Let me pull this guy's name up here. Where did this? Give me a second. I was mentioning you this journalist before we went live. Let me pull up the name. I was gonna play a clip of this, but a lot of these journalists will say that, oh, like I have sources in the military who are giving me this information, and they'll give a misdirection right after saying that. For instance, like the Washington Post, that's owned by got into a $600 million contract with, or Jeff Bezos' Amazon, got into a $600 million contract with the CIA. What Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, owns the Washington Post. Washington Post, was like the outlet that was like the launch pad for all the Russiagate theories. It'd be like, oh, it's like an anonymous general informed us that the smoking gun is in on Trump being an agent of Russia. Like an anonymous agent has told this. An anonymous intelligence official has told this. An anonymous it was all the sources that they're coming out. It was all anonymous sources. To me, like this highlighted the Jesuitry of like the whole Russiagate psyop. Like it just screams of McCarthyism, and like McCarthy went to Jesuit Sophia University, or Marquette University. Speaking on Sophia, George, this was the name I wanted to mention, was Benjamin Fulford. This guy is a great example of a Jesuit propagandist. He doesn't have a wiki page, but this guy has a big website, benjaminfulford.net. He has a ton of viewers. He has big I was going to play a clip. This guy did an interview with Sean Stone this week, and he was like bashing the Jews. This guy's like a huge anti-Semite, Benjamin Fulford, and this guy has connections. He interviewed David Rockefeller, for instance. Like average journalists don't get connections like that. Yeah, Benjamin Fulford, like right on his first article on his website, he's talking about the Zionist menace. Let me just sound test, George. Do you hear this? I'm just going to play this clip here.
Go ahead.
Do you hear this? This is him talking here.
These guys all left as of January 1st. And then what happened was we got...
Do you hear that? Okay,
Yes.
I was just going to play like a couple minutes because I found a clip of... I think this guy is a good example, like kind of encapsulating like a Jesuit propagandist in the media. I just want to play a clip where he goes into some of like his anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish lines that you hear. Rupert Murdoch, for instance. You brought up Rupert Murdoch earlier in the show. He's a Knight of St. Gregory the Great, Knight of Malta. He came out and said that the Jews control the media. For instance, so like these guys are actively parroting this line. But I just want to play a short clip here of Benjamin Fulford's, Jesuit trained at Sophia University's, recent interview with Sean Stone.
Basically, Bush people. Got Elliot Abrams of Iran-Contra fame. He's also, responsible for the Falun Gong campaign.
Just quickly, I knew the reason he was pointing out Elliot Abrams, George, is because Elliot Abrams is Jewish. But I'm gonna let him keep going here.
Against China. We got John Bolton. We got Barr. Who helped cover up 9/11. And so everyone's thinking, "Oh my God, what happened?" And this basically.
Just real quickly, George. You notice how he doesn't mention the director of the CIA during 9/11, George Tenet, went to Georgetown?
Or that John Bolton was a Nigel Malta.
Oh, great point. Yeah, you see, like this guy it's a good case. This guy's a great example of a Jesuit slime ball. I'm gonna keep letting him go here.
Basically, there was a 35-day shutdown, and during that time, please remember, the U.S. military was not shut down. Their paychecks were going fine. It was just the D.C. corporation paychecks that were stopped. And apparently, they stole taxpayer refunds and did a bunch of other things and bought themselves some time. But essentially, they're running on an empty. And I've been pushing very hard. Bankrupt the Washington, D.C., the entire establishment. That whole stupid show, with this hysterical fake, battle between the two factions, red blue. You know, it's just that whole stupid, you know, unproductive play act that we know as the Washington D.C. political establishment. It just needs to be unplugged, and that's what we're pushing for this end. Lobbying for the Chinese and the Asians and saying cut them off. Just pay the U.S. military to be planetary protection force for a polycentric world, and cut off that Washington D.C. thing and all the Zionists.
You hear that? So pay the U.S. military to be a polycentric planetary protection force for the world, and cut off the aid to the Zionists.
Now, getting back to Trump and Kushner and all that, and Netanyahu and all that stuff. Clearly, I've been told by my military sources that.
Did you hear that? I've been told by my military sources. This guy went to Jesuit Sophia, and just who's the current chief of staff at the U.S. military, Joseph Dunford, went to Jesuit Georgetown. So we'll hear what this guy says after, because I haven't heard this whole interview, but I think this guy's getting information, propaganda fed to him by the Jesuit agents in the U.S. Army, because his blog is just all Semitic crap. But I'll just play or do you want to chime in on this, George, before I?
Well, okay, but just okay. And what was his name again?
Benjamin Fulford.
Okay, Benjamin Fulford. Well, just playing a different angle. I brought this up to you before in the last show. We talked about CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, which was founded in 1994. One of the co-founders of it, as I said before, is Omar Ahmad, who got his undergrad degree from Jesuit University of Santa Clara in Santa Clara, California. And last year, the first two female Muslim Americans were elected to Congress. Ilhan Omar from Minnesota and Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. I believe she's from the Detroit area, and Omar from the Twin Cities. Well, so just as a trivia point, turns out regarding Representative Omar, her sister-in-law Sarah Noor got her nursing degree from the University of St. Catherine's in the Minneapolis area. Now, that's a Catholic school. And now, granted, that's just her sister-in-law, so it's not quite as powerful as if it were her sister or her daughter or something like that. So even though you have the Sunni Muslim woman from Somalia, she has a relative who goes to this Catholic school for her training. And something I've mentioned before, her colleague, Rashid Tlaib, last year spoke at Detroit Mercy University, where she was talking about her upcoming congressional campaign. And I guess it mentioned in this article this is from the Detroit Mercy Law School website. She's friends with a fellow by the name of Amir Zar. I think he's her handler, but that's just speculation. And he's the one who introduced her to the floor. Now granted, Tlaib, as I said, she's Palestinian Muslim, I believe Sunni. So she spoke at this Catholic school, this Jesuitical school, Detroit Mercy. I mentioned to you before, more than once, that around the same time, Omar spoke at a Catholic church in the Twin Cities area, Joan of Arc Catholic Church. So you have these Muslim women who gave speeches around the same time at Catholic institutions. Doesn't that strike you as odd?
A little bit, yeah. And guys like Benjamin Fulford and other Jesuit propagandists like him, omit information like this. And they all for example, how many common parroted line, and like I think this is a diversion just with Islam, is the idea that Islam is the Antichrist. I've seen that propaganda pop up quite a bit, over the last 5 years. But I think the Islam is the Antichrist stuff is to mask like the Jesuitical Vatican control of Islam.
Well, specifically Sunni and Wahhabi Islam. Now, speaking of which, something I mentioned, it wasn't last week, it was a couple weeks ago. I forgot her name. The wife of the president of Afghanistan. You can go look this up. She's she's a Maronite Catholic. Afghanistan is 99.7% Muslim. Therefore, they have virtually no non-Muslims there. However, the first lady is a Catholic. And just for example, we talked last week that Meghan Markle, the wife of Prince Harry, she went to Catholic school. The Empress of Japan, the wife of the emperor, the new emperor, she is trained by the Catholics. So you have all these people who are in positions of authorities, or at least ceremonial positions. The first lady or the president, the wife of the emperor, things like that. They're Catholic or they're Catholic educators and these people are in ostensibly non-Catholic countries, the UK, Japan, Afghanistan, and boy, but getting back to what I was just saying a moment ago, both Tlaib and Omar have been in office for less than 6 months, but they're constantly involved in some sort of flap. They're constantly making these comments, or one of their staff is making social media posts on Twitter, something about something that people that are anti-Semitic or being perceived as being anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, whatever the case may be. So these two, I think, were put in their positions just to foment agitation and just to froth up the right wing in America.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to wrap up with this, but the agitation we're seeing is like a wave, kind of like an insurgency of like or like a resurfacing of the Coughlonite, like anti-Jewish terror that was enacted in the 40s. We're just seeing that with with all the anti-Jewish comments that are everywhere online. You have openly congressmen in the U.S. Senate are making anti-Semitic comments. Just something's going on. I think my take on that is that I think they're gonna have like a false flag event that they're gonna possibly blame on the Jews. But the Jesuits have been terrorizing the Jewish population for centuries. Think of they signed a papal bull in 1555, Cunis Nunis Absurdum, which banned Jews to slavery eternally and forced them to live in walled up unsanitary ghettos, for instance. So I think it's because I think the culmination of all the anti-Jewish hatred is because we're seeing the Vatican's plans for a new world order reach near full completion. People are getting poorer and poorer all over the world. The banks are getting more and more centralized. Governments are getting more powerful. Police states are building up everywhere. So people are looking for someone to blame for everything that's going on. I think that's what the media knows this. The Jesuit media knows this. I think that's why we're seeing the anti-Jew stuff parroted. I just want to wrap up here. Just I'm gonna play another 40 to 50 seconds of this Jesuit trained journalist here, Benjamin Fulford, because he goes into some of this anti-Jewish rhetoric right here that you see is clearly a Jesuit line to this. And a book people got to read is David Kurtzer's book, The Popes Against the Jews, to see an historical background for the Jesuits riling up anti-Jewish hatred. It's not a coincidence that Adolf Hitler said that one of his mentors and his stances on Judaism was a Roman Catholic priest, Karl Lueger of Austria, for instance. But I'm just going to play another minute of this. But you're going to see the Jesuit propaganda come out here through Benjamin Fulford.
Clearly, I've been told by my military sources that he is just playing a kabuki act. That he's deliberately going along with everything they tell him to let them hang themselves with their own rope. Maybe. I'd like to see it happen. When I see Benjamin Netanyahu in handcuffs, I'll know it happened. But right now, that's what I'm hearing. And I've asked, for a push to finally terminate this Greater Israel project, which is really the source of most of the world's problems. People need to be put out of business. That's what I've been pushing for. That's what I've told the Asian secret societies. That's what I've told my military contacts. I think there's a broad agreement. And
yeah, he has connections to Asian secret societies and military contacts right there. But he's right here. We're hearing the Jesuit line being pushed right now that the Jews are the cause of all of our problems. I'm just going to play another 30 seconds of this.
A lot of the Jews, too, are waking up to the fact that Zionism is their enemy, not their friend. I would say about half, are aware that this is a scam. Half are brainwashed fanatics. I have Jewish on my mother's and father's side. I have Jewish blood, so I'm not being,
Yeah, I do as well.
Yeah, I'll end it there. People can watch this whole interview. It's on Sean Stone's YouTube channel. But you're seeing they're pushing this anti-Semitism everywhere, and I think it's because people are looking for a scapegoat to blame. And it's easier to just blame the Jews than to do the hard work and educate yourself on the Vatican power structure that's been controlling the world for centuries. Israel is only a 75-year-old country versus the Vatican, the Catholic Church, which has been in existence at least since the East-West Schism of 1054. So, the papacy was erected in the year 600. So you're dealing with an entity that's been around for 1,400 years. So is the Vatican controlling the world, who has been engaged in political nefarious activities for 1,400 years, or is it Israel, who's been in existence for 75 years? And when you look into it, the Vatican controls Israel. I'm going to do a future post on this. I found no less than 10 Jesuit Georgetown educated Israeli diplomats. Who were ambassadors to or from Israel. Theodore Herzl just quickly wrote pretty much got pretty much got permission from the Pope to create the state of Israel, and he went to see the Pope. Israel is completely controlled by the Vatican on all fronts. They signed an accord in 1993 to give full tax exempt status to the Vatican. The Vatican owns immense land territories in Israel. They own the holy sites, for instance. But I think it's just because they're people are looking for someone to blame, and it's just this is the line that the Jesuit controlled media is pushing. I'll pull up. Where's the list here? Give me a second. I was going to go through more of the Georgetown alumni list just before we wrap up the show, just to kind of prove to people the Jesuit control in the news media. This guy here, this guy's another print analyst here, Mark Mazzetti, 2-time Pulitzer Prize American journalist for the New York Times, and he serves as a Washington investigative correspondent for the Times. Went to Jesuit Regis High School. That's Fordham alumni. Give me a second here. Actually, I'll pull up the Fordham. It'll be just as prominent in Fordham. Okay, film, television, theater. There's journalism. Give me a second here.
Well, if I could just mention something. Well, something we've talked about before is to help create this illusion, this whole psyop that the Jews run everything. The Jesuits will use willing collaborators. People, they're known as Hofjuden or Papal Court Puppet Jews. They but they have control of them as they do with non-Jews, usually education, secret societies, sending their children to a Catholic/Jesuit school, or something along those lines. Um, I mentioned this before last week. We were talking about the alleged assassin of John F. Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald. Yes, I know Oswald didn't kill him. He was involved, but the fellow who allegedly killed Lee Harvey Oswald was Jack Ruby, Jacob Rubenstein. So you definitely, uh, uh, you definitely need to have him involved for a couple reasons. One, of course, to help reinforce the narrative that it's the Jews who run everything. And of course, to give the plausible. Okay, so some people might not buy the official story on JFK. Okay, so yeah, it was the mafia. Yeah, they're the ones who did it. Or like according to Albert Stone, well, it was the mafia and maybe the CIA. So with somebody like Ruby, it gave Rome plausible deniability.
Well, absolutely, and the people in that case, many people just admitted the fact that the director of the CIA at the time of the assassination, William McCone, uh, was a Knight of Malta.
Mm-hmm.
So, like McCone being the head of the CIA, being a Knight of Malta, people like almost no one like brought that up at the time. I'm just thinking right in the immediate, like you'd think that like as a critical researcher, knowing like the nefarious history of the Knights of Malta, that I think it's odd that like the CIA, like the director of the CIA during the assassination, was a member of the Knights of Malta. Just on that angle alone, the fact that that wasn't questioned, shows how controlled the media is. Or during 9/11, like there's George Tenet was a Knight of Malta as well, trained at Georgetown. Like the deputy director during the CIA, John Brennan, trained at Georgetown during 9/11. And it's amazing, like the CIA, the CIA by like 1975 has built the reputation of being a completely shady organization that like spies on its own people, that like terrorizes its own people. So it's amazing, like on top of like the Jesuitical connections, that like no one like questioned like the official line on these two incidents. And I have the list up here, George. Of I know like it's getting a little late, but I think this just shows like the overwhelming Jesuit control of the media. Actually, here's an Olympics cover. If people aren't aware, too, the current honorary chairman of the Olympic Committee, former chairman of the Olympic Committee, Jacques Rogue, was trained by the Jesuits in Belgium and is a Knight of St. Gregory the Great. Oh, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife, the First Lady Mariah Shriver, First Lady of California from 2003 to 2011. She went to Georgetown, and she was also a correspondent on NBC News. I didn't know that. Well, she was a sister. Her mother, Eustace Kennedy Shriver, was a sister of the Kennedy brothers. It's interesting. But Mariah, were you aware of that, George? Schwarzenegger's wife?
Well, I knew she was Catholic. I knew she was a Kennedy son through marriage, but I did not know that she had gone to Georgetown. Oh,
Yeah, she
surprise,
got
surprise.
the bachelor's in American Studies. Yeah, and she was on Dateline NBC, NBC News' Sunday Today, NBC Nightly News, the CBS Morning News. Yeah, so Maria Shriver is another Jesuit agent in the mainstream media. It's overwhelming, and like another like Bob, and she covered the 19. She got a Peabody Award for covering the 1988 Summer Olympics, and Bob Costas on NBC. He's done the Olympics for like 20 years, at least. Bob Costas. He got an honorary degree from Loyola Marymount University right after he started talking about how we need to have gun control, which I thought was interesting. Here's another one here. Current Kate Snow. She's an American television journalist for NBC News, serving as a national correspondent to all NBC platforms. Snow also anchors the Sunday edition of NBC Nightly News and frequently substitutes for the weekday broadcast. And she went to Georgetown, got a master's in foreign service. And she was a correspondent for the Rock Center with Brian Williams.
Oh,
So Kate Snow, she's plugged in there. You mentioned PBS earlier. This Judy Woodruff, I'll pull up her Wikipedia here. She's currently I think she does the Sunday night show on PBS. Judy Woodruff. She does she does the White House reports for the nightly news program PBS Hour. She was also a White House correspondent for NBC News, and she got an honorary degree from Jesuit Scranton and is a member on the Council of Foreign Relations. And Judy Woodruff has moderated U.S. presidential debates. So the Jesuits probably gave her an honorary degree for thank you for giving our two puppet candidates completely spoon-fed scripted questions. Thank you.
well, something we mentioned, I know we had to wrap this up, but something we mentioned before was the show What's My Line, which aired originally on CBS from 1950 to 1975. I believe there's been more than one reincarnation of it. And as we've said before, the original host was John Daly, 1914 to 1991, who got his undergrad degree from Boston College in journalism. And he went to Morris High School in Johannesburg, South Africa. Morris are like a religion. I think they're like an offshoot of the Christian Brothers. Anyhow, I'm not going to go to the list of all the people who were panelists of the show or guests, but as I said, among other people, they had a Catholic nun, I don't recall her name, who was a dentist from the 1950s. They had Fulton Jane Sheen. They had Alfred Hitchcock, who was on the host. One of the regular.
I recently, this was on Johnny. This was on a previous show. You guys, Hitchcock, in an interview, openly talked about being schooled by the Jesuits. I think he said he had developed perception skills, while under the Jesuits.
He did an interview with Tom Snyder on an NBC show called I believe the Today Show, and Snyder was saying, "So Alfred, both of you and I have something in common. We're both trained with the Jesuits." He said, "Oh yes," and so he's talking about his fond experience. So even back then, in the 1950s, they showed Rome told was telling you in broad daylight or at night that they're thoroughly in control of the mainstream media and popular programming. The
George, just really recently, I have this on my channel. Everyone should watch this clip. Type in Lou Dobbs interviews Jesuit priest. You'll see this on my channel. But Lou Dobbs, this was probably in 2008. He interviewed Thomas Reese, S.J., yes, a Georgetown Jesuit. But on live CNN, Lou Dobbs said that, Father Reese, you didn't answer a single question I asked, but you're a Jesuit, so you can get away with that. And to me, that was just that was an admission, on live TV that the Jesuit order is ruling the show. They can get away with lying and doing whatever they want. That was the implication of that. Finish your thought, George. I mean to cut you off.
Okay, so they had so the format of the show is they have 4 guests, celebrity guests, and there's 2 parts of it. They have somebody come on the stage who had an unusual job, and the host would ask this person, what do a series of yes or no questions. Then near the end of the show, the panelists would wear blindfolds and they'd have a mystery guest. And that's when somebody like Fulton J. Sheen or Alfred Hitchcock would be on the show. Well, anyhow, two of the longtime celebrity guests were Dorothy Kilgallen, who lived from 1913 to 1965. In addition to being on the show, I mentioned this before, she was a journalist. She wrote basically fluff pieces, she did reviews of plays and movies and things like that. But she did an interview of Jack Ruby in prison in Texas. And she told a friend, well, you know what? I'm going to break wide open the JFK assassination. And shortly thereafter, not even a week later, she was dead. She is found deceased in her apartment in New York City.
Oh, George,
Well,
I remember this. Could you clarify the name of this journalist again? Who?
Dorothy Kilgallen, Kilgallen. Dorothy. Just look up "What's My Line." It'll have her listed. And she was on the show for like 15 years or so. Another celebrity co-host who was Steve Allen. He was he did basically everything. He was a talk show host. He wrote songs, things like that. He was Irish Roman Catholic, and so he's one of the regular people on the show. So 70 years ago, or almost 70 years ago, the TV show What's My Line said, you know what? The Catholic Church runs media. They run popular entertainment, and we're just
well, it's truly pop culture is truly Pope culture.
Yes, and
it really is. And just like this list I have up here, George, I wanted to finish this before, just to hammer home your point. Like this list of just the Georgetown list on journalism and media is overwhelming proof that they control the media. Like overwhelming. Like this girl here, Nora O'Donnell. She currently co-anchors CBS This Morning. She is the former chief White House correspondent for CBS News and the substitute host for CBS's Sunday news show Face the Nation. And she went to Jesuit Georgetown and Douglas MacArthur High School. Interestingly, Douglas MacArthur, everyone should check out the photo of him with the Jesuit Edmund Walsh walking out of a Japanese Capitol building. But Nora O'Donnell, on prominent anchor on CBS, is Jesuit trained at Georgetown. Here's a CNN journalist, Miles O'Brien. He's a American broadcast journalist specializing in science and technology. He was CNN's science and technology anchor, and now he's a national science correspondent for PBS. And he went to Georgetown, Miles O'Brien. Let me see here. Walter Ratliff, Emmy award-winning documentary director for where was this here? He went to Georgetown. Let me see where he at the Associated Press. He won the Beat of the Week award for his work on the Associated Press's Pope John Paul II multimedia profile. Probably a whitewash if there ever was one. But that's Walter Ratliff. He went to Georgetown University. I just want to go through a few more of these. Martin Quigley Jr. He's the son of Martin Quigley, Martin Quigley Sr. was a Knight of St. Gregory the Great, Knight of Malta, Jesuit trained at Georgetown. Was on the board of directors at Loyola Marymount and Loyola Chicago. But Martin Quigley Sr. was he was an editor at the Hollywood magazine, the Exhibitions Trade Journal, and he was one of the Jesuit Daniel A. Lord wrote the production code, but if there was a co-author, it would be Martin Quigley Sr. Martin Quigley Jr. Went to Georgetown, and he was a spy for the OSS, actually, interestingly, and he was elected twice mayor of Larchmont, New York. Just interesting connection there, but just a few more journalist connections here. Timothy L. Bryan, he's a former reporter for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Talk Magazine, and executive editor at the Washington Post. And Timothy L. Bryan went to Loyola Academy and Georgetown University. Actually, interesting here, George. This is probably some Jesuit theater here. Apparently it was Timothy L. O'Brien who propped up the claim that Donald Trump was only worth $250 million. And that was all to create like division between Trump supporters. Like, oh, look, Trump's a fraud. He's not even worth $250 million. Yes, he is worth $250 million. Blah, blah, blah. Like, it was like substanceless. But Timothy L. Bryan, who worked at Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, New York Times, and Bloomberg, went to Loyola Academy and Georgetown.
Okay.
I just want to go.
I
So
actually,
you gotta get going. There's just a few more. I probably won't get to. I probably won't get to all of them here. Here's Daniel Henninger, serves as deputy editorial page director for the Wall Street Journal, and as a Fox News contributor. Went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service. But you,
okay. Maybe you could finish this when we go next. I just got a text. I actually had to be going. Um, I will mention one thing. Last year, we were talking about was it the Federal Society, the fact that almost all of Donald Trump's judicial nominees are part of it. Out of like 16 or 18, with all of them, with one exception. So there's supposed to be a Federal Society, or the Federalist Society is supposed to be this ultra conservative legal organization. That hello.
oh, hello, I'm here.
Okay. And it's headed by Leonard Leo, who is a Knight of Malta. It actually says that on his Wikipedia site. And they basically recruit lawyers, judges, DAs, people like that, and high-level
Yeah,
judges.
Leonard Leo. There's an article in the Daily Beast that was done on him, but Leonard Leo is like he's through his Vatican intrigue, like at the public George Mason University. Leonard Leo funded the Antonin Scalia Law School, named after Jesuit-trained Opus Dei Antonin Scalia. But it came out in the Daily Beast report that Leonard Leo actually was like influencing like the curriculum at secular George Mason University as a philanthropist. So you can see the influence. Leo's a Knight of Malta, and like the school actually put out a statement saying that we're very concerned that a private individual, Leonard Leo, like has this much. Like they said, like I'm paraphrasing, but the school put out a statement saying that like private individuals should not be able to influence academic policy. But I think the fact that Leo, connected, like you're saying, to the Federalist Society, he's the vice president. He's the Knight of Malta. He's super connected. Like Leonard Leo was like he was very close to George W. Bush when he was in power, and like it was Leonard Leo who told Trump to nominate Jesuit trained at Georgetown Prep Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
Well,
So that shows me that Leo is one of like Trump's like handlers behind the scenes.
well, actually, I wasn't even planning on talking about the Federal Society. What I was planning on doing is talking about their mirror image, the American Constitution Society, which is supposed to be the liberal answer to the Federalist. It was founded by Peter Rubin, who's Jewish, who got his undergrad degree from Georgetown. So,
ding, 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 ding.
So Larry Tribe, who's a law professor at Harvard, is a member of it. Almost all your leftist judges are part of the American Constitution Society. So the judges, this is just another example how they control the left and the pseudo right.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great information there, George. Wow. What was the name of the founder again of the
Peter Rubin.
Peter Rubin. Yeah, wow. Yeah, great information. Wow. And do you have to go right this second, or do you have like another couple of minutes?
I had to be going, but was there? Did you have one last thing to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna bring up like a couple. Let me see if I can find. Actually, this guy here. I want to bring up the Collier, Robert J. Collier. This is the last prominent one I'll bring up on the list. He died in 1918. He's an example of how the Jesuits were controlling media back in like the turn of the 20th century. Robert Collier attended Collier's magazine. That's where he comes from, named after his father. Robert J. Collier went to St. Francis College and then transferred to Jesuit Georgetown. And then he won the Merrick Medal from the Jesuit Philodemic Society at Georgetown. And then he received a doctorate from Georgetown. But he became the head at Collier's Weekly. And interestingly, he married the granddaughter of William Astor, which I thought was interesting. It says here right on Wikipedia, it says Robert Collier was in France for work related to the Knights of Columbus and his publishing empire. That's right on Wikipedia. So I assume he was probably a fourth degree Knight of Columbus as well. But Robert Collier from like the Collier's magazine was Jesuit trained at Georgetown. I'm pretty sure this guy was on like a commission. This guy was on like a South American Indian commission also, or like it might be his descendant. I know there was a Collier that was on a Indian commission down in South America for reading the book That Will Be Done, Nelson Rockefeller and the Evangelization in the Age of Oil. But yeah, we'll get going here, George. I just wanted to mention Robert J. Collier. But yeah, great show today. I think we conclusively showed in the show that the Jesuits are pulling the string media-wise and geopolitically and everything else, militarily, financially. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
Okay, well, we'll just take care. I guess we'll have to do a show in the next week or so, and I'll send you the sources of the American Constitution Society and the other things I've brought up that I may not have said confirmation of. And I just wanted to say, I mentioned Johnny. It was great having him on the show again. And he said, even though he's busy, he would like to do it at least once a month.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think Johnny gives great information, and he's he gives fantastic information actually, and it's very valued to have him on these broadcasts. I think he added quite a bit to the show we did, and I know I don't know how far he's going in with this book, but he's probably getting somewhat close to done. So I hope everything's going well on that angle for him. But that would be great if he could join like once a month or so. Hopefully Doc and Hawkeye also are able to join at sometime soon also. But yeah, I think that'll be it for tonight, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you sometime. Me and George will probably go live in a few or 5 days to a week or so. But take care, everyone, and all the best.